Hello everybody. It is July 26th, 2025 here in the United States of America. So before I start this video, a few things I would like to go over with anyone who's watching. The last video I posted received 6 views at this point. A few videos ago, the one I did about how Americans actually feel about foreign interventions has done almost 600 views. And I'm not quite sure if it's a general lack of interest in the topic that I talked about, if maybe certain topics tend to trend a little bit better and get more attention. You know, is this a result of just YouTube being YouTube? I'm not entirely sure. If anyone out there has any specific topics that they would like for me to speak about, then by all means, please leave a comment in the comment section. I'd really appreciate any kind of feedback. As I've mentioned before, on this channel, I like to talk about the decisions, the decisions that leaders have to make, the ramifications of those decisions, what decisions they probably should make to get the results they want. You know, decisions on treaties, what treaties are favorable, what treaties are unfavorable, depending on what each leader is involved, or whatever each leader who's involved in the negotiations is advocating for, things like that. I'm not an activist. Okay, this isn't meant to be like an activist channel. I'm not going to go on here and talk about my personal moral stance on foreign events. That might get mentioned in passing, but it's not really the point of this channel. There's a lot of activist channels on YouTube, and I frankly just don't enjoy making that kind of content. Do I consume it? Sure. Do I like to make it? Not really. I don't find those fun and engaging conversations for the most parts. So if anybody has any topics specifically they would like for me to talk about, please leave that in the comment section below. Also, too, occasionally I like to talk about some more philosophical stuff. The direction I think the world is heading, or a given civilization is heading. I've done some stuff about what direction the United States is going in culturally and politically, and the changes taking place, because I'm an American citizen, so I see it all around me. I like to make content like that too as well, but just my opinion on not really opinion, but my view on what's happening, why it's happening, and the direction that it could go. So if anybody has any feedback, I'd really appreciate it. And anyways, off to the beginning of the video. And this is just a quick one. It's not really going to be longer than 10 to 15 minutes. But I would like to talk about whether or not Western-style liberal democracy is going to continue in its current form past the next 10 years. Is that going to give way instead to some kind of centralized system of government, a much more executive kind of democracy, or is just going to give way to something akin to a monarchy with a nice democratic facade over it? I think because many Western democratic countries have run into some pretty serious problems. Over the last, I'd say, 50, 60 years, they have become increasingly corrupt. Their citizens have become very dissatisfied with the rate that decisions are made, what kind of decisions are made, that they've become frustrated with the fact that decisions are being made with goals of political activism in mind, rather than practical leadership and doing what's best for a specific people group or a nation. There's just a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of waste, a lot of suicidal and stupid policies that people are becoming frustrated with, and this is what they're getting out of democracy. This is what they're getting out of voting. And Western countries often pride themselves on the fact that they're democratic above all else. Well, how popular are their governments? How many good things are they doing for their citizens? What is the shape of their civilization economically and socially? Those are the things that they don't really seem to consider. It's more, well, we're very democratic, we're very tolerant, and we let a lot of people in. And those are the 3 main criteria that their worth as a civilization seems to be judged upon, while their populace is becoming increasingly frustrated and in some cases bordering on open rebellion. The UK, for example, I know some of my viewers live in the UK, but if you look at UK politics, it's becoming a powder keg, if you will. Like the water is boiling in the kettle and it's about to erupt through the top vent. It's just, there's so much animosity towards public policy seething beneath the surface. Eventually something's got to give. There's just no good pressure release valve, and that's many countries within the EU are becoming like that. The public is becoming increasingly hostile to the ruling elites, and eventually that gives way to something. Now, as people become more and more disenfranchised with the chaos of modern liberal democracy, are they going to advocate for the return of fascism, of monarchy, of some kind of republic with the strong man in charge? One thing that Russia did, and Russia tried liberal democracy in the 90s, and let's be honest, it failed spectacularly. The amount of corruption in Russia almost completely destroyed the country, and Russians don't exactly have a fond memory of the liberal democratic experiment. So what Russia kind of became after that was something akin to, I don't want to say a monarchy, but clearly there's one man in charge. Now, he doesn't control every facet of the country, believe it or not, but it's his political will that generally guides the country, although that is tempered with advice and counsel. But Russia still has the appearance of being democratic enough to allow people to at least express some of their political desires, but stable enough and not chaotic enough to at least give people some kind of semblance of national stability. So eventually what happens is when people live through perpetually unstable governments, the things that become most important to them are financial stability, whether or not they can get a job, are their families safe from crime, can they protect their families, are their national interests being addressed, do they have food on their plate, are they waking up every morning scared that this might be their last day on earth, or they're not going to be able to feed their families, or some catastrophic event's going to happen. Like, it doesn't matter how liberal or how fantastic your government is on paper, if that's the state of the civilization that government is presiding over, eventually something gives and people want security. This is one of the reasons why the Weimar Republic fell and Germany became Nazi Germany. Again, people were very dissatisfied with the Weimar Republic, and something came in to fill that vacuum. Same thing with Russia. The Russia of the 90s is gone, and what has replaced it is, I'd say, some kind of very centralized executive quasi-democracy that resembles more something along the lines of a monarchy than really anything else, with the thin veneer of liberal democracy over it. If you look at the Roman Empire, the Roman Empire was a republic for a very long time. Eventually, the chaos, constant political chaos and turmoil in the later years of that republic led the Roman elite and the people to change the system, to advocate for a change in the system, where Rome eventually kept the outward appearance of being democratic, but power became centralized in the hands of the emperor, and Rome stabilized greatly. Although civil war still happened, Rome never went back to being a republic from, I'd say, the beginning of the reign of Augustus all the way till the end of Roman civilization in 1453. It was imperial government with this veneer of a republic, and then it just became an outright monarchy up until its eventual complete end in 1453. So you're talking, roughly what's the date? I forget the date offhand that Augustus actually came to power, but you're talking about close to 1,500 years of Roman history was spent not as a republic. If you look at Greek history, everyone always talks about the Athenians. Well, the zenith of Greek power was actually under the Macedonians, under Alexander, and they were a monarchy. They never went back to being a republic or democracy again for a very, very, very long time. Most great civilizations in history, when they enter the golden age of their civilization, they're not democratic. Now, one could say the United States is in its golden era now, or about to leave its golden era, and it was the republic the whole time. But the history of the United States is not quite yet over. Are we in a period of time that's similar to the later stages of the Roman Republic? And then the United States will transition into something a bit more authoritative, resembling a monarchy with a thin veneer of democracy. It's hard to tell, but democracies only work for, I'd say, a short while as far as the window of history is concerned, and there has to be a proper set of circumstances for that democratic government to flourish, thrive. You can't have massive wealth inequality. You can't have massive social changes happening. You have to have fairly cohesive society, religiously, politically, culturally, even ethnically. Again, because what happens when these things start to give way and the society becomes like very religiously diverse, culturally diverse, ethnically diverse, you end up with little groups all vying for control of the government for their own interests and their own benefits, which is understandable. If you're part of that group, you would like that group to be advocated for in the upper echelons of that government. But then that brings about instability. It brings about infighting. It brings about civil war. Like politically, if you have a bunch of different political ideologies vying for control of the system, kind of like what you have in the United States, you have progressivism, like liberal progressivism, neoliberalism, and like neoconservatism and libertarianism and paleoconservatism, and these different things all vying for control of the government. Now, whoever gets the seat of power, everyone else has an existential crisis, like their entire world just crumbled. Every American presidential election ends up being some kind of an existential crisis for half the country. Well, that can't continue in perpetuity. Eventually, something has to give. People become so unhappy and frustrated that the dam breaks and violence breaks out. And at that point, will people care if the country is sufficiently democratic, if it meets all the criteria of a liberal democracy? Will any of that matter at that point to people? If you look across the Western world, most liberal democracies have populaces that are very unhappy with their leaders. It's fairly routine for a Western democratic government to have a head of state with a sub 40% approval rating. The United States is really no different. Congress is pretty much universally despised in the United States. Presidents now, I think, probably aren't going to break 50 to 60% approval rating because the country's so polarized. Canada, quite a few people are unhappy. Western Europe, quite a few people are unhappy. But then they look to the east. They look at countries like Belarus. They look at countries like Russia. They look at countries like China that are more authoritarian with how they're structured. But the people are healthier. The people are happier, or they appear to be happier. They have a healthier, more reasonable, practical foreign policy. They have now, again, like certain things like freedom of speech might not be as absolute as they are in the United States, of course. But then again, many liberal democracies are also not placing any value on freedom of speech as well. In the UK, it's pretty routine that people get arrested for Facebook posts that in the United States would land, a judge in prison if they, or a police officer out of the job if they were arresting people for these things, for sharing memes and whatnot. So again, these people living under Western democratic societies are looking at this saying, is this really any worse? If the government is going to be authoritative in some way, I would at least like them to be authoritative and advocating for my interests, not constantly working against them. And then at that point, really, who cares about democracy when you have your children to feed? You want to keep them safe. You want to feel like you have a future in your nation. You want to feel like there's a reason for getting out of bed. There's a reason for having children. There's something that's going to be there for your children when they grow up. A happy nation, a good culture to be part of. And as that slips away, again, people are going to care less and less and less about democracy. So will there be a shift in the Western world eventually towards more centralized, authoritative governments that are more practical and efficient? I'd say there's a good chance. there's a good chance we'll see it. Now, I think most of these countries would still have a veneer of democracy, and I absolutely don't think any of these countries would actually resort to literal fascism. You know, I don't see the fascist party or the remnants of any fascist party in any of these countries ever returning to power in earnest. They surely won't revert to communism either. I'd say if anything were to happen, many of these countries would revert to some kind of pragmatic authoritarianism to reestablish stability, maybe. But we live in a very quickly changing world, and it's hard to judge exactly what's going to happen. But this is just something I wanted to discuss. Again, I'm not advocating for this. I'm not saying that this should happen. I'm saying this might be an inevitability of the sets of circumstances and political realities that we're seeing across the Western world. But anyways, I'll be back with another video Monday. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, please, if you have any suggestions for things you would like me to talk about, like me to cover outside of like political activism, like leaders' decisions, treaties, concepts like this, please leave me a comment below. And until then, have a good day.